Well, hello everybody. Today I'm talking to Ray across the pond in the States. Just remind me where you are in the States, Ray.
I'm in central Pennsylvania, near the capital, Harrisburg, that nobody's heard of, outside of Pennsylvania. It's not,
Well,
everyone thinks of Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, but those aren't at the capital. Neither of those are the capitals. So we're in central Pennsylvania, which is in the northeastern quadrant of the United States.
is there or was there a nuclear facility in Harrisburg?
Yeah, actually, just about 4 miles from my house. That was the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor that melted down, almost melted down in the late 70s. I remember when I was a kid growing up in Indiana, seeing that on the nightly news. So actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because when we first moved to Pennsylvania, we rented a house in that town, little town, just like I could pop my head over the fence in the backyard and see the steam stacks from the nuclear power plant that was out on the island. But they've since decommissioned that. It's no longer operating.
Well, I was listening. You've heard of Kraftwerk, have you? The
Yes.
German. Yeah.
Yes.
I was listening to their re-recorded, remastered version of radioactivity,
Yeah.
and it's in
Yes.
the air for you and me. And they've done this kind of rather more politically correct remix of it. And Harrisburg is mentioned. There's this weird
Really?
voice going Chernobyl and Harrisburg and so on and so forth. So anyone who listens to the remastered Kraftwerk songs will have heard of Harrisburg.
All right.
However, we digress.
We've gone off the rails already.
Yes. Okay, so we're here really primarily today to talk about the kind of strange journey, or perhaps unexpected journey, between Protestant Evangelical Christianity and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, something that we've both experienced. And we were chatting online and realized we had kind of similar stories in kind of certain overlaps in certain ways. So I'd really like to hear your story today, Ray. If I can just fire some questions at you, it would be brilliant. And I thought we'd kind of disrupt the timeline a bit first by coming a slightly more up to date, kind of doing the backstory in a moment. Can you remember the first ever Orthodox church service that you attended? You probably can, I would think.
Yes. The very first one I ever attended was about 10 years ago. It was not long after we moved to Pennsylvania. I was attempting to start a freelance design business after having quit my job and now having no income after we moved. And so we were in the middle town in the shadow of 3 Mile Island. My wife took the kids, I forget where they went. I think they may have gone to the beach, and I had some freelance work to do. And so I couldn't go with them. So I was home alone, and it was on the weekend. And I think it was before we'd found a home church. It took us about 7 months once we moved up here to find a home church. We loved the church that we were at in Louisville. We were sort of spoiled at that time, and we're looking for something that resembled that, and it was very difficult. So they were out of town. I didn't have a home church, and I was a participant on an online forum that had a lot of different Christians as part of it, from every background: Baptist, throughout evangelicalism, Roman Catholic. There were a few Eastern Orthodox, charismatic, like run the gamut. Conversations obviously were very interesting and sometimes heated when it got political, but that's neither here nor there. But so there was a gentleman on there who was Orthodox, and I thought to myself, I'd never been in an Orthodox service before. I'd not actually been to a Catholic mass outside of a wedding. So I thought, you know what? The kids and the wife is away. We don't have a home church. I'm just going to go find a local Orthodox parish and drop in and do that. So I went to Greek Orthodox cathedral, and so that was the first one I went to. And obviously the Greek Orthodox, as far as the style of the music, is very different, obviously, than even say the Russian or the Orthodox Church of America, which has Russian roots. The music's very Greek. To the Western ear, it sounds very Middle Eastern. And I really enjoyed the service. The interesting thing is, everyone there was very Greek, looked very Greek, dressed beautifully. So I come in, I'm wearing, I think, a white button-down shirt, pair of khakis. I look presentable, certainly better than many of my fellow evangelicals at church sometimes. But I felt underdressed there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of slid into the back pew. They did have pews there,
Yeah.
which I later learned was a rather recent addition to Orthodoxy. And so I took my seat at the back pew and just sort of started ingesting the service. And it wasn't long later, and this was before the Divine Liturgy began. And so the church probably has a capacity of 400, 500 people. And there was maybe 30 in the whole church at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm sitting on the back pew, and an older lady comes in with a gentleman, and she sort of leans over my shoulder and whispers into my ear, "Excuse me, sir, my family usually sits on this pew."
Brilliant start.
And yeah, and I was like, "No, very sorry, I'll just slide over here." So I slid over to the next pew to the left, and they sat their two bodies on that pew, which was probably good 15 feet long. No one else came to sit in that pew the whole service. And I don't know if she felt guilty or she was just trying to be helpful and she hadn't realized she was being rude, but after a while she leaned over across the aisle and she says, "Do you speak Greek?" And I said, "No, I do not." And so she showed me in the Divine Liturgy book and the service book where the English portion was. And so, that was her attempt, I guess, maybe to build a bridge. So I always remember that story with a lot of humor, because, it's like somebody could have gone into that church and really left in a huff. And I've been around the church world long enough to know that there are always those kind of people in the church. So it didn't bother me. It amused me. And so I stayed there for the rest of the service. But I will say one thing, the music was beautiful. I don't remember anything about the homily particularly, but one thing that did really impress me was the sensing of the service. When the priest walked around and sensed the icons and sensed the service, that was something that was completely out of my experience as an evangelical.
Yep.
And so for the first time ever in a church service, I experienced the service in all five senses. And I remember walking away from that service like, wow, incense has almost been redeemed, because the only time I'd ever encountered incense was, people burning it in college to cover up certain substances, or walking into an old record shop. And I thought, wow, like that's so powerful. Like, if you lived in that every week, that would, anytime you would smell incense, it would take you to the presence of God, not to the presence of some, potato chip eating, or crisps, as you would say. That was basically my first experience.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. And so when you went out of that service, would you say that the kind of the hook had already lodged in you somehow, or did you just kind of mull over it for a while after that?
I wouldn't say the hook, because it was really almost 10 years later before I really started, probably 8 years later before I really started looking into Orthodoxy. But the incense really did impress me. I thought, wow, understanding in the Old Testament how the incense was very much part of the temple ceremonies and the rituals. I had always kind of describe it. I've always had, as an evangelical, cathedral envy. I'd always walk into these beautiful cathedrals, whether here or I lived in Britain for about 6 months. And so I visited Salisbury Cathedral and York
nice.
Minster and several of the cathedrals in Edinburgh, Scotland, and even traveled to Germany and visit the Freiberg Cathedral in southern Germany and Notre Dame, thankfully before it burned, a number of those. And I was just always in awe of the space and what the space did to you and the beauty of the spaces. And I always thought, why does my tradition not have any of that? And then I thought, well, I'm an artist. I'm being shallow. I'm being shallow because look, I can worship God wherever. I don't need these cathedrals. These cathedrals were done as showpieces to impress everybody, and there's really nothing, spiritual there. That's what I would intellectually tell myself, but emotionally, I just was really drawn to them. So I've always had that, and I would also say that in addition to that being a sort of luring me to either Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, I read a book by a Trappist monk. What is his name? I just went blank. He's a Trappist monk, and actually he lived out his monasticism in a Trappist monastery just south of Louisville, Kentucky. Thomas Merton. He's a very well-known Roman Catholic monk. I think he died in the late 60s. And I read his book, The Seven-Story Mountain. And that was probably around the time I had gone to the Orthodox Cathedral. And I was really impressed with that book. He sort of patterns the book in some way off of Augustine's Confessions, because the whole book is him looking at his life sort of autobiographically as an older, more mature person of faith who is interpreting his life according to his understanding of God's working in it. And also, as Augustine does, he confesses his sins throughout that book. And I just remember when he first entered the Roman Catholic Church, the way he talked about the Eucharist was really, really compelling and really new to me. He kept talking about how the Eucharist was a means of grace and how he craved to have the Eucharist as often as possible. And he would stop by his priest every morning to receive the Eucharist. And when he'd visit another city, the first place he would go would be a church to receive the Eucharist. And the way he spoke about that was very powerful. And it really infused that sacrament with power. And growing up in my Wesleyan tradition, communion was done maybe on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. It was just sort of a reenactment, maybe a teaching tool. And I had never heard it spoken about in those terms before, where it was given such seriousness and power. And that really stuck with me.
Did you have the funny sugary fruit juice?
Yes. We had usually Welch's grape juice, which is
ubiquitous.
And these little wafers that were about, probably about that long and about half as wide, you barely even knew that there was anything on your tongue. That's what we did. And now later on, I would go to churches that would offer communion weekly. But even there, and that was moving in the right direction, certainly. But even there, it was not regarded as something holy as I encountered it in that book. And so that really stuck with me. So that sort of, after reading that book, I never received the Eucharist in the same way in my local church. I would often pray that God would fill me with his grace through this. And I think really that was something that just started eating at me over time.
Okay, so we chatted about this already, I think, didn't we? We're both from a Protestant evangelical background, both become Orthodox. I think it's probably true to say that we don't want to kind of unnecessarily diss our kind of Protestant evangelical heritage. I guess you and I both look back with with very great affection and respect. But of course, nonetheless, you kind of begin to realize more and more there's things missing, you know, there's difficulties here. And so I guess that process began to develop more and more with you, did it? Where you began to wonder,
Yeah.
what's to be done?
Yeah. I do want to reiterate and agree with the point you just made. I've been in Christianity and evangelicalism since I was around 4 or 5 years old. And my particular branch of Christianity was very conservative. I learned a lot of scripture. So I'm deeply thankful for the formation that I received in my various evangelical denominations that I was a part of. I grew up in the Wesleyan denomination, which is very Arminian, and sort of then over time gravitated, because of the excesses or the weaknesses that I found in that, I gravitated toward a more Calvinist outlook, and which taught me some things, and I gained a lot there, and some of the teaching that I was under was really helpful. And then at some point I saw the issues with Calvinism that were problematic, and so I was sort of like floundering, like, where do I go from here? And I started listening to some Roman Catholic podcasts and also Eastern Orthodox podcasts. I had a good friend who became Eastern Orthodox, and so we would talk theology and church and belief and faith quite a bit. And so his entrance into the church was certainly a catalyst for me giving Eastern Orthodoxy a lot more consideration. So I know that when I was in the last church before I became Orthodox, I was one of the communion servers. And because of my changing views in communion as I started looking into Orthodoxy, I realized that, and I want to say this with grace, and I realized that the way that the elements were handled did not convey the reverence for them that I had begun to embrace.
Yeah.
And so the elements were disposed of or taken care of in a way that now I can't do. And so I remember talking with my pastor, who was a very good man. I said, Pastor, my view of what the Eucharist is and what those substances are has changed, and I can't dispose of the elements in the way that we are currently doing. I said, I can continue to help distribute the Eucharist, but if it'd be okay with you, I would just like to set them down and leave, and then whoever else, according to their conscience, does what they do. And he was very gracious and agreed to that. So I commend him for that greatly. And that was really a beginning of me then eventually figuring out, like, I probably shouldn't even be serving the Eucharist because I don't feel like I'm qualified to do that. But I really have to say that the Eucharist was sort of the entrance point. And then once I began listening to Orthodox teaching regarding the Eucharist, and then letting that branch out into other things like, what is baptism? What are the sacraments or the mysteries overall? And why are they more than mere ordinances or merely remembrances? Why is baptism more than an outward sign of an inward work? That sort of began to filter through all of my theological beliefs, and it really started to alter all of them. And so probably over the course of about 2 years, I dramatically changed the way I felt about these issues and believed them. And my wife, I didn't really talk to my wife a whole lot about that, because my wife, she doesn't like change. Like, I like variety, I like change. She's not that way. And so I thought, I just need to do this by myself. And at some point, if rises to the level where this is a serious thing, then I will talk to her, but I just need to do this by myself. And so that probably went on for a year and a half. And she knew I was listening to some podcasts and reading this and that, but I really didn't talk about it to her a whole lot. But
were you a little bit nervous about that? Were you thinking ahead and thinking, well, if I want to take this step, what will my wife think about it?
Yes,
that
definitely.
cause you a bit of unrest, maybe?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of nervousness and unrest, because I knew that if it became a very serious issue, I couldn't go back. Once I realized and believed the things that I was starting to believe, I couldn't go back and just exist in a standard evangelical church. And so then I obviously thought, well, if my wife does not end up coming on board, this could potentially cause a serious break in our unity in our family. The last thing I wanted to do was I go to one church, she goes to the other, and the kids go to wherever, with that amount of confusion. And that was something that I did not want to do at all. And so that was something that became a matter of prayer and a matter of seeking wise counsel. I was listening to a podcast on Ancient Faith Radio, which I don't know if you're familiar with.
Good old Ancient Faith Radio. Yes.
There we go. All right.
Listen to it. I listen to it a lot. I'll let you carry on in just a moment.
Yeah, no worries.
Ancient Faith Radio has also been for me a tremendous help, particularly hearing similar stories, hearing testimonies and descriptions of people from a Protestant background. And there were kind of phone-in shows as well. Someone would phone in and say, well, I'm interested in this, but I'm not sure, and and whoever was Father somebody or other, I can't remember who it was.
The Father Evanoff of Orthodoxy Live.
Probably, yeah, very gently talking it through and so on. But yeah, it's been a great help. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that show, because I also heard a lot of those calls where it was typically a husband who would call in and say, I've been really looking at Orthodoxy, and my wife's just not having it and not on board. And I just thought the pastoral counsel that he gave was so important. And it was exactly what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. His advice was, you be the man that you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
You follow God and you live the life that the church teaches, and you do it with humility and you do it with grace. You don't try to coerce or force. You live it, and you allow her to ask the questions and to become interested. And so I really made that a matter of prayer, because when I'm onto something, I like to push.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm excited, and I want to let's talk this out. Let's lay it on the table. Let's really dive into this. And my wife is just the opposite. She needs a long time to process. If you try to do that, if you try to push, she will push back. And so that was something that really, that whole process taught me a lot about how to lead in a Christ-like way, like what that looks like. It doesn't mean I'm the spiritual head of the church, so I dictate what goes on in the house. It is, I'm the spiritual head of the house. And so I need to know my wife, and I need to know my kids, and I need to be who I need to be in order to draw them in such a way that they have the confidence of where I'm wanting to lead them.
Yeah.
And so I made that a matter of prayer, and I prayed, Lord, if this is your will for us to go into Orthodoxy, please allow us to go in as a family. Don't let this be used as something that will break up her family. And I made that a regular matter of prayer. And to his, because of his grace, that's what happened. Maybe getting ahead of myself a little bit, but
that's okay.
Yeah.
So what was the obviously in this process, there's a kind of a phase where you're thinking really seriously about it, but it's still kind of far off somehow. You haven't taken any concrete steps. I mean, for me, the first concrete step of commitment, if you like, was locating a priest in our local area and sending him an email saying, I'm interested, come along to one of the services. So what for you was the transition between kind of vague but gradually intensifying interest to saying, right, okay, I'm going to take a step now? How did that come about?
The I would sort of drop little nuggets during conversation that says, hey, I'm listening to this podcast, and there was this really interesting thing I heard, and sort of share that, and sort of gauge how receptive she was. And oftentimes a few minutes of conversation about that would suffice, and then I would get the okay, that's that's enough, I've got enough to put in my head.
Yep.
And I started going to the midweek Vesper services when I could.
Yeah.
I didn't demand that I must go, but when I could go, when the schedule allowed, I would go to the midweek Vesper services at a local parish. And my friend was already attending there, and so I would go there, and I got introduced to the priest, and I got introduced to other people in the congregation because of his already attending there, and he had just been chrismated when I really started getting involved. So I would do that, and that went on for probably a year or more. And the conversations would happen maybe every couple months or so between my wife and I. They would maybe get a little bit longer, and I could just detect that there was a little less
reserve
of pushback, or of hesitancy, or of reserve, maybe a little bit of curiosity. Slowly coming in, and I had to keep reminding myself, don't overdo it, don't push too hard, slow down.
I guess over that time she could start to realize, I suppose she began to realize, well, it doesn't look like this is going to go away. It doesn't look like it was just a short interest and now it's gone. So yeah, carry on.
Definitely. So we would have these conversations, and then I think it was in 2019, it was before the pandemic, our local parish, as many do, will have some sort of food fest, as the Orthodox Church are known to do. And so she likes ethnic food like I do. And when we still lived in Louisville and were attending the huge mega church, the 21,000 people church that where we met, we would occasionally, once a year, we'd go to the local Orthodox Church for their food fest and just love it. And I remember just going into the church there and like, oh, this is really beautiful. Then we'd go back home. So she was already familiar with the food aspect of Orthodoxy. And so I just sort of offhand, or tried to be offhand about the way I delivered it. I said, hey, do you want to go to the Orthodox, the Slavic food fest this Sunday after church? And she was like, yeah, let's do that. And I said, you know what? Our church is a bit of a drive from there. Why don't we just go to their divine liturgy and kind of see what it's all about? And then we can be first in line for the food fest, and we don't have to wait in line a whole lot. And so she kind of gave me that look like, yeah, nice bit of manipulation, but she agreed. And so that's what we did. And I remember my oldest son, he liked our old church a lot. I just remember talking to him, and he was not eager to go to a different church. And I said, look, I'm like, this is something that Daddy thinks is really important, and I just want you to go. Like, I don't know what's going to happen from here. So he was having issues just making that effort to go there. And so my wife said, well, why don't you take the other two kids, and I'll follow you with him a little while, and I'll talk to him. I'm like, okay. So I told my oldest, though, before I left, I said, he's really into Lord of the Rings. And I've been really into comic books my whole life. And so I'd give him some comics or whatever. And so I remember telling him, I said, son, I just want to tell you two things about this church, and then I just want you to think about it. One, the church looks, when you walk into the church, it looks like you're walking into a comic book because there's pictures all over the walls. And
Yep,
two, if there was a church in Lord of the Rings, this would be it.
yep.
We're like, all right. So eventually I'm sitting in church, my wife and he come in a little bit later, come and sit down with us, about 5 or 10 minutes into it. My oldest leans over to me. He's like, Dad, you were right. I said, about what? I'd kind of forgotten that conversation. He says, this place is beautiful. It is like Lord of the Rings. And I was like, yeah, it really is. He's like, that chandelier, that, the candles. And so
that Gandalf there.
Yeah. So he really responded visually to the inside of the church, and that it didn't look like we just had come into a room and set up a bunch of chairs. It looked like, okay, this is a place where something special happens. And he as a boy immediately realized that and responded to that. And I thought that was such a demonstration of the power of place and space that me as an evangelical longed for, but always tried to dismiss. Like, that's not important, but it is important. It's not absolutely essential. Because obviously you can do church anywhere. Like the church can convene in a field if it must, and in a room if it must, and those are all fine and good. But isn't it wonderful to have a dedicated space that is that's an arc from the outside world? It's a thing of beauty, and he immediately responded to that. So we went to the food fest, enjoyed the food, didn't have to wait in line very long. And then the next evening at dinner, I didn't even bring it up anymore that day. The next evening at dinner, I just sort of threw out at the dinner table, I said, so what did y'all think about the church yesterday? All of the children, we loved it. It was great. Would you like to go back? Yeah, it's great. And I looked over at my wife, and she sort of slumps over and she says, you're all betraying me. But kind of with a laugh, like it wasn't you're all deserting me, you're all betraying me, kind of with a smile. And so I knew that she was softening. And so that was in the fall or autumn of 2019. We went back to our church, remained active in our church. I would still go to Vespers. Things went along, and then COVID hit, and everything shut down. I started working from home. We were marooned in our houses, as you probably were over there. And while we could watch church online, we were not going to church. And so emotionally, we were sort of removed from everything. And I think God really used that to detach my family from our old church and allow our current church and the Orthodox Church to stand side by side and to be evaluated, removed from any sort of current emotional attachments. And it was during that time when my wife's like, let's go to the Orthodox Church.
Right.
And I was like, yay.
What's your wife's name?
Her name's Amy.
Amy, I hope you don't mind us talking about you at such great length, and thank you very much. And I hope we haven't said anything rude or upsetting, but thank you.
I'm
Amy.
sure I'll hear about it if I have. So.
But it's interesting what you said about the visuals. I went to our previous Baptist church. I visited the service. It was actually, I think, on Christmas Eve. It was because of our situation with our Orthodox parish is a bit complicated. We have to actually go on a ship to get there, but that's another story for another time. And because of the old calendar, new calendar, so I went along to the Christmas Eve service at the Baptist church, and it was great to see everybody again. Oh, hello, lovely to see you, and it was lovely to see them. I wasn't sitting there in the service thinking, oh well, I'm really glad I've left this, and this is awful, or anything at all like that. However, I did notice that I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to be focusing on. if you see what I mean. So
Mm.
there's kind of very bare walls. I think there are a couple of little kind of homemade banners somewhere, and then there's somebody standing on the platform addressing us in various ways. And I was thinking, that I don't know what I'm supposed to be directing my focus to. It was this kind of really strong feeling that I had, but anyway, that's for another. So the church you were going to, the Orthodox parish you were going to, was the in the Russian style, no seating, standing up, and people kind of gently moving around during the service and so on.
Well, our church actually does have pews,
Oh, okay.
sort of as a concession. I know my priest has said that if it were completely up to him, he would get rid of them.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but ours does have pews. But even so, the service will begin, and there will still be people following around, venerating the icons, lighting candles. So there's a lot more activity during the service than would typically happen in my evangelical circles.
Yeah. Okay. And did that feel, I mean, for me, it was a very interesting experience going into a church, a Christian church, where I felt, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here, because for decades and decades and decades, it's always been me. I'm welcoming the stranger, or the poor person, they don't really know how to behave in church, let's put them at their ease, and so on. And then experiencing that myself, and really, I thought, well, okay, well, how did I learn how to behave in church when I was little? Because I was brought to church when I was a baby. Well, you just kind of watch what everyone else is doing and gradually start to copy. But it did feel a bit awkward or strange at first, I have to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
And I thought, well, if anybody who knows me from outside of here were watching me now, what's he doing? Did it feel a bit kind of a bit slightly awkward or strange at first? For example, approaching the icons.
It was very
As an
awkward.
example, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first started going to Vespers, like I felt uncomfortable making the sign of the cross, like I was doing something pretentious because I wasn't
Yeah, yeah.
Orthodox. And so I didn't make the sign of the cross, but then I felt self-conscious for not making the sign of the cross
Yeah,
because everybody
yeah,
else
yeah.
was making the sign of the cross. Or especially if like I'd come in to a service that I wasn't aware was going to be different, and then suddenly people were doing prostrations, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
like, there's no way I can be comfortable in this moment. Like if I do it, I'm going to feel weird. If I don't do it, I'm going to feel weird. So there was a lot of that. It for a number of weeks, probably a number of months, when I came into the church and I would attend Vespers, like I would pick the corner rear seat so that most people were looking forward and not viewing me, and I just kind of sat as an observer. And while I would follow along in the service notes, uh, I had no idea what was going on. I
Yeah.
remember the first time we went to the liturgy with my wife for the food fest. And that was the first time I'd been to a divine liturgy since I was kicked out of the pew at the Greek Orthodox Church
Yeah.
10 years earlier. Um, my wife was laughing because she says, I just didn't know what was going on. Like there would be some chanting, and then somebody would say a prayer, and then like these doors would open and these people would run outside with candles, and they would stand there, then they'd run back in, they'd be gone. It's like, what just happened? What did that mean? And I was talking about that with my priest later, and he always remarked that, yeah, he said somebody had described it to him as like one of those German clocks where the little, the cuckoo clocks where the people come out, they kind of go around, they process, and then they go back inside. And yeah, I was like, yeah, I thought that was a great illustration of that.
Yeah.
But I had help. My friend, I'm going to mention his name so I can name drop, and my friend Tony, who we went to the same church, and then he went Orthodox before I did. So as we were talking, and as I started visiting during the Vesper services, he really helped sort of help me bridge that gap between feeling totally awkward and starting to understand what's going on. And so that was a big help. So he would introduce me to people. If I had a question, I'd ask him, like, why are they doing this? What should I be doing? Is it rude or wrong for me to do it or not to do it? I felt much like that I was entering a different culture, and so I didn't want to offend. And I didn't want to put on a show like I was necessarily part of the in group when I wasn't. So over time, I think most people who grow up in a modern evangelicalism will have those really uncomfortable transitional periods. And I think the important thing is to understand that that's normal, to understand that the self-consciousness you feel is self-imposed, and the people there are not thinking those things about you that you think they might be thinking about you. And to give it time, just to give it time. Don't expect to be able to understand it in 1, 2, 10, 15 times. Allow that to, I would say one of the biggest things that that's really become important to me with Orthodoxy, just understanding patience. Don't try to understand quickly. Don't rush. Don't force things. Let things have their time to work out. That helped me with my family coming into the Orthodox Church. It's helped me as I've become Orthodox. It was interesting. I was listening to a video by Father Seraphim. He's a monk on the Isle of Mull. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes, yeah, I've seen he was another contributor, if you like, to my approach. But yeah.
So he did a video on patience, and he was talking about how one major aspect of the fall in the garden was a lack of patience, and how God was going to give the good gifts to Adam and Eve. They would eventually have the knowledge. They would have eventually become like gods, but they wanted it then. They didn't want to wait. And so the impatience led them to sin. And so he says, wherever there is impatience, there is Satan. Wherever there is patience, the Spirit can work. And that really left an impression on me.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so to kind of gradually draw to a close, so did you all enter the church together, or was it kind of a staggered process, or have you not necessarily all joined, or how did that work out?
No, God be praised. We all entered the church as a family. We were chrismated at the same time. We became catechumens at the same time. We entered the church. I think if I remember correctly, we entered the church. You entered the church maybe a week or two after we did. If I'm not mistaken.
November 20th, we were November 20th.
Yes, and so actually, there was a question I was meaning to ask you. I remember that we started chatting online because obviously we didn't know each other before.
No.
Orthodoxy, because it's a little hard just to run into you on the street, having an ocean apart. But I can't remember what thread or what Facebook page was it that we interacted first. Was it Lord of Spirits, or was it Dr. Jeannie Constantinou, or?
Oh, I really can't remember, I'm afraid.
I was trying to think of where we actually first interacted, and then talking about our particular close proximity to entering the church, and that sort of developed into us having some exchanges online, which eventually led to what we're doing today. So but that's not important. But I was curious if you remembered.
Yeah. Okay. And well, just one kind of penultimate question. You've described it. It is quite a kind of a long and drawn out, and as you've described it, patient and considered process. Has it been difficult in any sense. I mean, I guess you get different reactions from different kinds of people. I've been very surprised. You know, most people that I know from my Baptist church and the evangelical churches that I've been involved with, most of them, I would say, obviously don't really understand it, or might find it slightly unsettling. But at the end of the day, they've kind of more or less given me their blessing. Well, go ahead. You know, if this is where you feel that God's drawing you, then well, yeah, you have to go. And you know, but they've had all of their questions about it. But interestingly, there was one person who I thought would be very expansive and relaxed about it, who was very, very suspicious of the whole thing, and another person who I thought would be very suspicious and no, that's all man-made religion or whatever, who was very, very kind of almost a bit wistful, actually. So, wow, yeah, I can understand that, you know, the depth of tradition and the beauty and so on and so forth. But have there been any kind of, shall we say, unfortunate collisions or difficult conversations along the way, or has it been fairly, shall we say, peaceful and gracious, the process?
I would say on the whole, it's been peaceful and gracious. I'm still friends with a lot of people from my old evangelical church, for which I'm very thankful. You know, again, just to reiterate the gratitude I have for that. When we finally found the church up here that we were attending, and attended there for about 8 or 9 years before we left for the Orthodox Church, that church made a huge difference in my life here in Pennsylvania, because I came to Pennsylvania knowing no one except for my wife's family. Our whole friend group, our whole social group, our whole support system grew out of that evangelical church. And we went through some really difficult times through those years, and they were there for us, and they helped us, and they stuck with us, and they were friends, and they acted as Christ would have acted toward us. And so you know, I will forever be grateful for them. And so I've really tried to maintain those friendships, and have done so, and am very happy about that. We've had discussions. Obviously, when you leave a church, those discussions come up, and yeah, I wouldn't say that, you know, certainly they don't necessarily agree with the changes in my theology, but the discussions have been very civil and respectful, and
excellent,
and have not interfered with our friendship at all, to which I'm very grateful.
Brilliant.
And there's been a couple friends who have actually sort of expressed interest in Orthodoxy since then, and glory to God for that. Others who have not, you know, God bless them on their journey as well. And so overall, it's been a very positive experience. You know, I have to be very careful as a new Orthodox. When I get excited about something, I get excited about it. And that can be a positive thing, it can be a negative thing. And so I have to make sure that that I don't put a stumbling block in the paths of others in conveying orthodoxy, or conveying my excitement of orthodoxy. So I just got finished reading Dr. Jeannie Constantini's book, Thinking Orthodox, and
me too,
probably the last half of the book, and maybe we can even discuss that at some point, the last half of the book was essentially bludgeoning me over the head and saying, shut up.
She's quite a strict mama type, isn't she? Really? Yeah.
Shut up! You don't know what you're talking about yet. Just be quiet. Don't theologize. Learn. Allow yourself to be formed. Live in humility and repentance. Keep your mouth shut most of the time.
Yes.
That's been, you know, I like to talk.
Okay.
And so that was something that, at this point in my Orthodox walk, was very good for me to hear. And and I think that will stick with me, because she hit that point very hard for quite an extensive part of the book.
Yep, I read that book as well. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how these different authors have different styles. But
Mm.
okay, let's wrap things up now. So, one of the difficulties I have is when explaining to people in the Baptist church or the Pentecostal church. I've got lots of friends in the Pentecostal church. They kind of want to know in just 1 or 2 minutes, well, what is it? What's orthodoxy? And you think, oh my goodness me, how on earth can I, as you've just described, I'm an absolute beginner myself. How do I describe orthodoxy in just 1 or 2 minutes? It's a really, really difficult thing to do. But if you're put into that situation, what's your, shall we say, elevator pitch for Holy Orthodoxy, would you say?
Yeah, that's a challenge. Orthodoxy seems to be, if you can say it in 30 words, use 3,000. The Orthodox. So anyways, as far as an elevator pitch, I would first say, well, let's go to Dubai, and I forget what the name of the tower is there. That's the currently the tallest building in the world.
Emirates,
Let's get on
Emirates,
that elevator.
All right.
and
Okay, that's
and
cheating. Yeah.
I might be able to give you a summary by the time we reach the top.
Oh, and the elevator's broken down. Yeah.
Yes, yes. We're trapped in the elevator for 3 days.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a difficult one. I guess it would have to involve, it would probably depend on whether the person I'm speaking to is a Christian of another tradition, or whether the person is an atheist or an unbeliever. I would say that if the person is involved in another Christian tradition, I've often likened orthodoxy, or my journey into orthodoxy, as having lived in a forest for my entire life, in the evangelical forest, and having been sustained there, and understanding it, and thinking that really was the totality of my home. And then suddenly reaching the end of the tree line and breaking through, and then realizing that I'm on this high cliff where I see this huge vista that spreads out before me of mountains that recede into the distance forever. And understanding that, oh my gosh, there's so much more here than I ever knew. And I would say that that for me, that's the way I describe the way I felt when I was starting to look into orthodoxy. There was a length and depth and breadth and richness to it that I had never encountered before. I know there's a priest down south, Barnabas Powell. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
He has a that wonderful Southern way of making points, but he says, you know what? Because he was a Pentecostal preacher for many years. He says, look, chicken or a turkey sandwich is a wonderful thing. It's good, it's nourishing, but if you can have the whole Thanksgiving dinner with all the fixings, why would you just stick with a turkey sandwich?
Yeah, why indeed? Yeah, why?
So I think that's very appropriate. I would say that for, and this elevator is getting really lengthy. I would also say that orthodoxy has really opened my understanding and re-enchanted the world. It has, we've all been washed in this post-enlightenment materialist. The only thing that truly exists is what you can detect with your five senses, or what can be investigated scientifically, and there's nothing beyond that. And even though Western Christians will agree that there's a spiritual realm, it's always out there, way far away. And orthodoxy has really opened my eyes to seeing that it's here too. So I don't know, that's not a good elevator speech.
That's okay.
but that's about the best I can
Yeah,
do.
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I was going to start singing the Lord of the Rings theme tune as you described.
Right.
Anyway, I'll finish with. Shall I finish with my elevator pitch? I mean, this is
Yes, yes,
how I.
absolutely.
This is
Maybe it'll
how I.
help me kind of consolidate mine.
Well, yeah, I kind of. It's a really, really difficult thing to do, but I thought, okay, I've got to have something quick and simple, even though it's impossible, really. But for me, I thought, well, okay, so Holy Orthodoxy is a complete life package of beauty, depth, and tradition of worship, combined with very gritty and quite demanding in a way, kind of daily, weekly, monthly, yearly spiritual disciplines of various kinds to help us keep on track spiritually and to grow in Christ likeness, because I'm very, very poorly self-motivated. And so I really do appreciate all of these various graces, blessings, mechanisms, things I have to do as well, to keep me on track, basically. And that's how I try and describe it. I mean, that's obviously the most ridiculous of most tiny of thumbnails, but that's a starting point, I suppose, because Christ-likeness, that's a thing that's very, good. A good evangelical Christian will also be, oh, Christ-likeness, yes, of course, and at the end of the day, that's often been the way that people have then been able to graciously dismiss me, if you like. Well, okay, if it's really the quest for Christ likeness, then, well, what can I possibly say against it? And God bless you, and hope to see you again, and so on and so forth. So, Ray, it's been fantastic talking to you again. Amy, hope you didn't mind us talking about you, and God bless you and your children, and thanks ever so much for talking to us, and or talking to me, I should say, or talking to whoever's watching, of course. Be great to maybe have future conversations, maybe more specifically about bits and pieces and certain themes. But thank you ever so much, Ray. God bless you, and keep on the straight and narrow, and many years, as we say.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I might have to steal some of your elevator speech, because that was much better than mine, and
Oh,
actually provide some better information. And honestly, I commiserated with a lot of that. I'm not the most disciplined person, and so yeah, these daily disciplines are something that really does put it in a different category as from lots of other Christian traditions. It's something I really need. And so, yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed our talk, and hopefully we can do this again. Maybe I'll do the reverse and learn a little bit more about your story here in the near future. And God bless you and your wife and family as well. And until we meet again.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. God bless you, and cheerio.
Likewise, God bless you.